Well, hi everyone. I'm Sebastian Pellejero. I'm a U.S. columnist with Reuters, and welcome. Our session today asks a simple but loaded question: are EVs too expensive? We'll go beyond sticker prices to talk about total cost of ownership, incentives, business models, and everything that consumers are facing when deciding whether to go electric. Let's start with a quick round of introductions so everyone knows where you're coming from. Huiling.
Hi everyone, my name is Huiling, and I am an electric vehicles analyst with BloombergNEF. For some of you who are not familiar with BNEF, essentially we're a clean energy research arm under Bloomberg, and for me, I sit under the Electrify transport team. I mainly cover the North American market, looking at economics, policy, and strategy side of everything about EVs. We are also a pretty global team that we have team members in Asia, in Europe, in South America, and looking at everything electric.
Hey everyone, my name is Ehrett. I lead business development and public policy for ABB eMobility. We're a leading global manufacturer of EV charging infrastructure. We've deployed over 60,000 DC fast chargers across 85 markets worldwide, specifically focused in the high-powered DC fast charging market, which is a critical component to anybody driving an EV that needs to charge publicly. So thrilled to be here today.
Hi everyone, my name is Brook Taylor and I'm the Vice President for VinFast here in the US. I've been with the company for 5 years, and if you're not familiar with VinFast, we are a global car brand based out of Vietnam. We are the first homegrown automobile brand from Vietnam, and we sell vehicles across the globe, including Southeast Asia, India, Indonesia, the US, Canada, and Europe.
Great. Let's start with Huiling. So, from your data, where are we today in terms of price parity between EVs and ICE?
Yeah, that's what we're thinking about. We're thinking a lot about that at BNEF. And if we're looking at the affordability side of things, if you're only talking about the upfront cost, yes, battery electric cars is still more expensive than their internal combustion engine counterparts. That's what we all of us are seeing in the market. But if we step back and kind of zooming out to see how much does it actually cost to own an EV across a vehicle's lifetime, or we commonly refer it to as the total cost of ownership. For certain drivers, EVs is already cheaper to own compared to ICE vehicles. According at BNEF, we published this total cost of ownership models that you can plug in all the numbers, upfront costs, fuel, maintenance costs, and sometimes like some miscellaneous things like insurance. And then for high mileage drivers that drives long distance, EV is already cheaper. Sometimes at $1 per kilometer basis, it can be like 20% cheaper than an ICE car. And then the high mileage drivers that I'm referring here, we're assuming they drive like annually 50,000 kilometers per year, or like roughly 40,000 miles per year across an 8 years lifetime. So it really depends on how you see the affordability issues here.
So what assumptions matter the most then in your model? Like when I see studies that come to opposite conclusions, what is usually behind those differences?
So if we look at the TCO alone, there are a lot of nuances to it. For our TCO modeling, we look at different segments. For small, medium, large SUVs, they reach kind of parity at different times, and then TCO is different across. And then you also have the driver's profile. If you're just a daily commuter, you drive it for just go to work and come back, probably the savings you get from fuel and maintenance is not enough to offset the higher upfront costs at the moment, at least according to the study that we just published last year. But for high mileage drivers, as I mentioned, it's so much more economic to own an EV compared to an ICE car. That's why you see a lot of Uber drivers or taxi drivers owning an EV. And then another aspect of it, it's different in different countries. We look in Europe, in the US, and even in the US, different states, there's an economics difference between like gas prices and electricity prices, and it changes across the year as well. And these all plays an important role.
Great, thanks. Brook, on the ground, what are you seeing from customers? Are people motivated by long-term cost savings, or is sticker price still the deal breaker here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I appreciate that. MSRP is still a significant driver for customers. At VinFast, we currently sell 2 all-electric SUVs, which is another driver for customers. They're looking for vehicles that are as functional as the vehicles they're traditionally familiar with. So we sell affordably priced all-electric SUVs. And I know that we talk a lot about the cost of ownership. That initial sticker price definitely makes a difference. So for our vehicles, the VF8, full-size, mid-size 5-seater SUV. The current lease rate for that is $279 a month with 0 down. The MSRP on that is $39,000. It's a very accessible vehicle. It's within reach for most customers, and it has the functionality of other cars that you see the customers are looking for in the market. We also sell an all-electric 7-seater SUV. The retail price of that is $62,000, but the lease rate for that is $479 a month. And 0 down. When you get to that point, you start to see customers that are looking for larger vehicles, 7-seaters. I have 4 kids myself. This is a highly functional vehicle, and when you compare it to what's available out there on the market from an internal combustion engine, you have the Tahoes and the Jeeps of the world, it becomes incredibly compelling from a price point, and we see that that's really what's driving customers.
Great. And Alice, charging is one of the biggest variables when it comes to total cost. How wide is the gap between home and public charging costs, and how does that shape whether EVs take greater share in this market?
Yeah, I mean, I think New York Times recently put out an article where it showed that for drivers, you actually were able to save costs if you were able to primarily charge at home during non-peak hours. That changes, that calculation changes when you start looking at drivers that are entirely dependent on public charging, like your garage orphans, as a term, if you're not fortunate enough to be able to charge at home. That's when it does become more expensive. And so at ABB, we're really looking at how can we make it easier and more cost-effective for public charging operators to sell energy. And so in order to do that, we're really looking at how can we look at load management. So like when you're looking at total cost of projects, a really significant part is not necessarily just the charging infrastructure, but it's also the upstream grid infrastructure. So looking at how can we maximize load management to decrease utility costs associated with charging, and then also right-sizing the charging infrastructure to the project needed. So providing that modularity. So maybe you're starting off with a 200 kilowatt charger today with the ability to upgrade to a 400 kilowatt once grid capacity increases and maybe the utility environment is a little bit more favorable. And that'll help sort of decrease the gap between at-home charging versus public charging.
How long are we there from that point?
I think we're getting closer. So I think the key things here are total cost of ownership for the public charging providers and their infrastructure. So reliability of the charging infrastructure. So when it's being put in the ground today, making sure that knowing that it's going to work is the bare minimum, but knowing that it's going to work and be reliable for the next 5 to 10 years. So that's a critical part. And so I think we're already seeing leaps and bounds being made there. And then also on the utility infrastructure, supporting these sites with battery energy storage, getting creative in terms of going to Public Utilities Commission and getting the authority that you need to make these investments ahead of time are getting us closer. I would still say we're a few years out from public charging operators being able to continue to lower those prices to be comparable to at-home charging.
Okay, thanks. So it sounds like there's a lot of nuance to this issue. If each of you had to pick one factor to determine whether EVs win or lose this cost race, like what would it be? We can start with Huiling. What is the key factor to what, in your view, to what whether EVs win or lose the cost parity race?
Key factor?
Yeah.
For upfront price batteries, definitely. We're seeing battery technologies keep improving. Actually, at BNEF, we publish this battery price survey every year, and then we're seeing in the past 10 years, the prices drastically decline. I actually just quickly checked the number that back in 2014, the battery price at the pack level was over like $700 per kilowatt hour, and then last year I remember it was like 115. So it's like drastically decreasing, and then that's also going to help with the MSRP.
And I'd say it's ubiquitous, competitive public charging. So where you are dependent on public charging, having an abundance of networks, an abundance of reliable infrastructure with the right amenities, all competing against each other to earn driver loyalty, that will continue to push pricing down, and also utility policy landscape continuing to invest and making sure that we have grid capacity to deploy charging station that's ready for drivers.
Yeah, I would just add to that, going back to my previous point, that the price of the vehicle itself. We just passed a dubious milestone in the U.S. here this week, which is the average price of a new vehicle is now $50,000. 5 years ago, it was $34,000. So as consumers are increasingly seeing fewer electric vehicles potentially in the future and a higher price point for internal combustion engine vehicles, affordable, accessible electric vehicles, I think, have a very significant role to play to capturing new market share and to converting customers over to the electric vehicle side.
Okay. So much of EV affordability today depends on incentives, from federal tax credits to local utility grants. Brook, from like an automaker's perspective, how predictable are these policies, and when the incentives change as they are recently, how does that impact sort of your plan model and pricing and production?
Yeah, I think the only constant is change at this point, and we've seen that federal and state policy has become incredibly unpredictable. At VinFast, our plan and our goal is to be able to offer a competitive vehicle at a competitive price, regardless of what the federal or the state governments are doing. So we're extending our $7,500 lease and finance rebate beyond the September timeline, allowing customers to pay the same price for their vehicle that they would have had they had the federal rebate. I'd like to see other car companies doing the same, but I know that's not going to be the industry standard.
Huiling, what kinds of incentives actually drive adoption versus more sort of like shift prices around? Like what data do you see that shows which incentives lead to uptake of these cars and in a lasting way?
When we were talking about policy, there are two sides of things. So most of us see mostly the demand side incentives, that the one that just ended the clean vehicle tax credit, the 30D. But on the other side, people less talk about on the supply side, you also have the advanced clean manufacturing tax credit 45X, which helps to drive down the cost of batteries. And there are also policies related to charging infrastructures that really helps to facilitate things. And then we also incentives can also do that much. They are not going to exist forever. And then actually we recently did a study looking at how the tax credit phase out or subsidy phase out did to other markets, say China, Germany, and Canada. Germany and Canada also had their tax credit phase out. It was definitely a blow to the EV sales in Germany when they ended the tax credit in 2023, and then their 2024 sales kind of plunged for like 20%, and same thing in Canada, that they just ended early this year. It's kind of a EV kind of a growing pain. But if you look at some other markets like China, China officially ended their EV subsidies in 2023, and it was a phase-out process that they initially decreased the tax credits, the subsidies in 2021 by 20%, 30% in 2022, and then after that, we're actually seeing the EV growth continue to grow in markets like China. And by the time that the EV subsidies went away, the EV penetration rate in China was around 30%. And then we look at the U.S. market today, just as Ash at the last panel that she mentioned, every 1 in 10 cars sold in the U.S. is EVs. That's a 10%. So incentives helps to bridge the gap, like helping manufacturers or helping consumers to adopt new technologies before like we get there. But like it will essentially fade out.
And on infrastructure, are there policy bottlenecks that are sort of affecting affordability, whether it's permitting or sort of grid tariffs? Just wondering what the charge is there.
Yeah, I mean, from an incentive perspective, I think that it's been a mixed bag, right? So we're fortunate, as mentioned on the previous panels, that NEVI is continuing. So there are still going to be those federal incentives that people can compete for to deploy public charging. But we do know that the alternative fuel vehicle tax credit is sunsetting. And so without some of those incentives, and there are certainly challenges around permitting timelines and high demand charges, those costs are going to continue to be a factor. But I think without there was a little bit happening where I think there was so many incentives that were so great for the industry for a long time, but it did lead to maybe what could be considered like the tail wagging the dog for a little while, where there was like an urgency to just like get chargers in the ground as quickly as possible that weren't as much focused on the customer experience, the quality of the charging infrastructure, and overall providing like the right amenities for drivers. And so I think now is an opportunity for the infrastructure market to continue to mature and sort of what's going to shake out without the heavy prevalence of incentive is going to be the best possible charging experience for drivers today.
So if each of you could design sort of like an EV affordability accelerator, what would be sort of the top policies that you would enlist in there? Maybe let's start with Brook.
Yeah, I think consistency is key, and a commitment to electrification that is not going to change based on recency and trends. You know, VinFast is all electric. We started out by producing internal combustion engine vehicles for the Vietnam market only. And within 3 years, we had made the commitment to transition entirely to all electric, decommissioned all of our internal combustion engine production, and now only produce electric vehicles. And as of just this week, we announced that we've already sold 100,000 electric vehicles globally in this quarter of this year. So we're starting to approach other incumbent car companies that, they have conflicts. They're conflicted based on their commitments to internal combustion engine versus electric vehicles. So if you're going to do it, you have to be all in. You have to have that commitment. You make the commitment to quality and to innovation, and you have to have the courage to see it through.
Yeah, so I think from a policy perspective, it would be ensuring that we are continuing to invest in our upstream grid infrastructure to support quick, high-power charging deployments. So that's critical. And then on the deployment side is making sure that you're really factoring in load management, distributed energy resources, battery energy storage, really thinking about how can you use those tools to deploy quickly, even given maybe potential grid constraints. So maybe making sure you're factoring in load management, and then also modularity for the sites. So sites that are being designed today need to be designed with supporting the batteries of the future and supporting the power levels of the future from a charging perspective. And so making these investments in upstream infrastructure and scalability will help to ensure that the investments today are beneficial for the drivers of tomorrow and continue to drive down the overall cost and maintain affordability.
I echo with Brooke's point about consistency, because if we were comparing across different markets, when you see sales plunge suddenly, both of these two countries, they saw their kind of subsidies ended abruptly, and then people have really little information. And for example, if you're an automaker, you're trying to do your manufacturing planning, and you don't know that next year there is going to be tariffs for your imported batteries, and then those are really hard for long-term planning. So consistency is really, really important when we're talking about if you want to build the accelerator program. And also maybe an idealist and the kind of wishful thinking, a lot more collaborations and coordinations is important. If you can partner with different suppliers, and those will definitely help accelerate the adoption as well.
A lot of good ideas. Maybe let's define what affordable really means. I mean, we keep hearing about the $25,000 EV of the future, in China. You can see cars listed at that level. Brook, what does that mean in sort of practical terms today? What needs to happen economically to reach that price point?
Yeah, I mean, obviously VinFast is approaching that level. And the other part of it as well is the overwhelming reliability of electric vehicles versus an internal combustion engine. An ICE engine has 3,000 parts, an electric motor has fewer than 30. So as a consumer that's driving these vehicles, you're going to have fewer problems and challenges that you're going to have to deal with at the service center. So as companies make that commitment to EV only, as companies transition their service centers into EV only, you're going to start to see a better experience for customers, and we can drive down costs as well, so that MSRP price point is right where it should be, and customers know that they're getting a reliable product.
And Huiling, when do you think genuine entry-level parity sort of happens based on your model, and what would be the drivers that get us there?
Yeah, we think a lot about these questions at BNEF, and we actually run our upfront price parity modeling. But on our modeling side is all very theoretic, whether you have access to that battery price and whether this is the manufacturing cost. The result that we model, we're seeing from a cost perspective, we're seeing the upfront price parity for small, medium, large SUV segment to reach parity in the US around 2025 and 2027. But we're gradually seeing this to happen, but not necessarily, because there are a lot of other things you need to consider. Just as said, policy changes, you get tariffs, that's extra costs, and there are a lot of new things that are happening. Also, automakers making this investment, that they want to recoup their investment, we set a certain premiums, but not necessarily that's the premiums or the margins that the automakers are expecting for. So there are a lot of like nuances when we are talking about the upfront cost, like price parities. And in terms of the actual mass market cars, we're actually recently looking at this. If we really want to reach the mass market, just look at what's being sold well in the market right now. If we're talking about the US market specifically, 85% of the cars sold in 2024 was in mid-size sedan, mid-size SUVs, and pickup trucks. And out of those 85% of these cars for these segments, 5 out of 6 of them are priced between 20 to 40K. And then if we think about the cars that are being sold well in the market right now, if you think about mid-size SUVs, you will think Toyota RAV4, Honda CR-V, and those cars are priced around 28 to 34, 35K. And then if we compare the lower cost and more affordable models, the Model Y, that's around 40K. So there is still a distance there we need to bridge, like 5K, 6K.
And you mentioned tariffs, which everyone's navigating right now. I guess I'm wondering, what have you seen as the impact, whether on the automakers themselves in producing these cars or in consumers' behavior, sort of in their expectations for buying cars going forward?
Definitely, I think Brook will be better positioned to answer this as an automaker.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, I mean, tariffs are certainly having an impact on the entire industry. I think also what you're going to see, as I mentioned in my previous statement, is that the long tail of the tariff costs are going to actually start to add up when you get to parts and you get to replacing component parts on vehicles. Consumers are overwhelmingly going to have to deal with that and bear the brunt of those additional costs. So it's not just the upfront costs of the vehicles that are being imported, it's the parts and the supply that's going to have to come in. And when you're talking about an internal combustion engine vehicle that's got more parts, it's got more service required, every time you hit that service center, you're going to be paying those additional costs as a customer. As an electric vehicle driver, you have the potential to save money not only at the point of sale, but over the life cycle of that vehicle.
And Alice, on charging infrastructure, are there innovations that are happening right now, whether on the technology or the business side, that could help bring down total costs? I think of like charging credits or home charger installs as part of the installation costs. Like, what are you looking at that really is driving sort of adoption of the charging products themselves?
Yeah, so I think there's some really good examples of programs that are happening across the country that are enabling affordable charger installation. So like California is a leader in this space, and so they're supporting, they have a program called Cali VIP that is really supporting, it's a rebate program for public DC fast charging at public locations, so you can do it at like parks, grocery stores, shopping malls, places where people are, and so they're incentivizing charging infrastructure there that is making it affordable for people to deploy. And then there's also quite a few level 2 like programs, so the slower charging or at-home charging, and then a lot of different utilities are also offering rebates for at-home charging infrastructure that are making it much more manageable and much more attainable to put a charger in at home. I think there are some real challenges in terms of that people need to consider in terms of like, what does your panel look like at home? Like, are you going to need a panel upgrade to support an at-home charger? And so some of those things that continue to need to be addressed, but I will say increasingly there are utility programs across the country that are supporting these installs that are making it more and more feasible.
Maybe for the broad panel, are there states, whether it's California or other countries, that are leading the charge on EV adoption, and what sort of lessons are you learning from them that are maybe material for the U.S. market here? We start with Brook.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put in a plug for our home country, Vietnam. Vietnam now, 40% of all new vehicle sales are electric vehicles in Vietnam. 5 years ago, it was closer to 0%. And Vietnam has invested heavily, particularly through VinFast, in over 150,000 charging points throughout the country. And it's not a small country. There's 100 million people there. But they overwhelmingly understood the environmental situation that they were up against and the need for rapid change, not just for electric vehicles, but also in scooters and in buses. So VinFast is trying to fill that void. In Vietnam, we sell over 8 different models of electric vehicles. We sell electric scooters and mopeds, and we have electric buses as well. And what you've seen is a country that has rapidly caught up to the rest of the world and is now surpassing many other countries in transportation electrification. And that commitment that I keep talking about is what's required. It's something that Vietnam has invested in. VinFast is meeting the challenge, and you're seeing customers who are overwhelmingly excited about the opportunity.
Yeah, I think I can speak. I mean, so today where we are in New York, there's a lot of really great make-ready programs that are in place to help support that upstream utility infrastructure that I was talking about. And so that is really critical to overall charger deployments and making charging more affordable. So there's great work happening here in terms of make-ready infrastructure. I think what's pretty exciting too that we're going to continue to see is support for these large charging hubs, and they're currently doing this across the West Coast, and I think we'll continue to see it throughout the country. And I think one state that maybe is not often mentioned that is really doing a lot in terms of creative incentive programs as well as driver incentive programs is in Colorado. And so I think that there's an example where it's not a huge amount of money being spent, but the incentives are there for the drivers, and then there's a favorable utility environment to support public charging deployment.
And I think it's really about collaboration and building a healthy ecosystem for competition. So if we're seeing this is a great event that brings different stakeholders here, and then you get to talk with each other. What are you seeing in the market? What we are seeing in the market? It really helps to facilitate this growth. And then also like a healthy ecosystem for competition. It's really competition that helps to drive down costs. Like I'm more familiar with the Chinese market, and you see the price coming down. Like it's more nuanced, but still like competition helps as well.
Well, and with just one sort of forward-looking question, what areas of innovation, over the next few years are you most excited about that could, help contribute to driving the price down for EVs? If anyone wants to start.
I'm a battery fan. More battery, new technologies.
Charging infrastructure systems that can easily incorporate distributed energy resources, so solar, battery energy storage, to help support areas where grid capacity is lacking and quickly deploy public charging infrastructure.
Yeah, I would add to that battery technology as well. High density batteries, solid state batteries, and a diversified supply chain, I think is going to change the game for EVs.
Well, thank you all. This conversation is very insightful. Seems clear that affordability is improving, but at an uneven fashion, and I'm looking forward myself to paying $25,000 for a car. So thanks again, and thanks to all listening, and have a nice rest of your day.
Analysts for tackling the tough questions around affordability and accessibility.